cool. So we are recording. Of course, we're recording after I walk through all of the stuff. Okay. So if there aren't any other questions, let's dive right in. So in the README, I put the kind of the deployed example links for the front end and the back end on the top. There's also a link to the has many through association in the Rails docs. So let's just take like a minute or two and you just walk through these on your own. Just kind of read through this has many through association section. Just to get, somewhat familiar with our goals for today. Just note that I just happen to use, instead of physicians, I'm using doctors. I just can't spell physicians very well. I didn't want to deal with it, so we're going to deal with doctors instead of physicians. But other than that, the relationships are pretty much the same. So take a minute and read through those guides. Cool. So just a quick overview of what we're doing. This is pretty close to what our finished kind of data, the model or the model of our MVC is going to look like in our Rails app. But this is what our different model files are going to look like. So we're going to have a class of doctor instead of physician, but this is what the has many relationships are going to look like. We're also going to create an appointment model, and this is what that relationships, those are going to look like. And then the patient model. And this is pretty much what this is, what that model is going to look like. We're also going to add some validations, some very simple validations just to keep in the spirit of what you guys did on Friday. But that's the gist of what our models are going to look like. Here's an image, kind of a visual of how the relationship is going to go. So again, a physician or a doctor in our case will have many patients through appointments, and a patient will have many doctors through appointments as well. If we scroll down here, so this is an example kind of on a high level of what our schemas are going to look like as well. So we'll be creating the schemas. We're actually going to use a generator to help us out with the schemas to get us bootstrapped in the interest of time. And we'll walk through that. Again, Rails gives you a lot of shortcuts and a lot of magic, if you will. And we're going to take a look at it's not too much magic. It's just going to like create some files and save us a little bit of time today. And we'll take a look at that. Let's hop into it. So step 1 and 2-ish. And I'll put these into Slack. So we're going to create a new Rails API project. And I want to make sure that I just added it to the README if you refresh. Make sure that you create this app. Well, I haven't pushed it up, but I added a note right here. Want to make sure that you guys create this app outside of your WDI class repo, because this app is going to require its own version control. And since we're pushing it to Heroku, we're not going to be able to push to Heroku and do version control if it's already in the WDI class folder. So the one caveat to this, if you want to put this on your desktop, actually, I'm going to build mine on my desktop. just make sure that you don't create this app in your WDI2 project folder. And I'll put that here into Slack. And just to make it easy, I would just maybe put this on your desktop if you want. Cool. So let me get to my desktop. Make this a little larger for you. Yeah, if you can't see anything really well, if anything's too small or whatever, just let me know. So would someone want to come on mic and explain what this Rails new command, kind of walk us through what we're doing with these little flags and stuff in this command? Does anybody want to review for us what we're doing there? So we've got Rails new, and then what is the argument right after the Rails new command? So what am I typing right here? Rails 5 API demo.
The name of the app.
Yeah, it's going to be the name of the app. And do I, unlike Express, do I need to create a project folder that I create all these files in, or is Rails going to do all that awesome magic and folder structure for me?
Rails will do it for you.
Yeah, so remember Rails is going to scaffold out this entire thing. So we'll need to make sure to CD in to this folder once we create it. The -- API flag, what is that going to do for us?
Does that mean that our app will not have view engine?
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah,
Okay. I was not sure.
no, that's great. So yeah, most importantly, it's not going to have a view engine. Since we're only dealing with like the server side stuff, it's not going to create a view engine. And there's some other like particular middlewares that would go along with creating a view layer for our app. So Rails is just going to omit all of that cruft, all of that extra stuff, which is going to make our app super lightweight and a lot more efficient. Yeah, so -- API just tells it that we want to use the backend portion. What about this next flag, this -d, and then PostgreSQL? Why are we, what does this do, and why are we using this -d flag? Why is that important?
Does that have to do something with letting it know to use Postgres instead of, I think it was like SQLite or something?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so Rails out of the box uses SQLite 3, which is a very, very lightweight version SQL database. It's actually just one file. I don't know if you guys looked at that last week, but it's actually a file that lives in your Rails app. Compared to Postgres, which is an entire like more substantial engine that exists. You know, we installed that Postgres engine last week, so it's a much more robust database and such. So yeah, so we're telling this Rails app that we want to use Postgres as our default database engine. Why do we want to use Postgres and not SQLite 3 for this app? It has to do with deployment. So will Heroku deploy if we're using SQLite 3 as our database? I think maybe Colin mentioned it last week, but the answer is negative. So Heroku would not deploy a Rails app if it's using SQLite. It just can't. It just won't handle it. So that, if for no other reason, that's why we're using Postgres, because we're going to deploy this thing to Heroku, deploy it to production later today. We want to make sure that we go ahead and tell Rails to use PostgreSQL as our database. And what that's going to do is it's automatically going to install the PG gem into our gem file. And it's also going to configure, we have in our config, we have some database configurations, and it tells it what kind of database to use, the name of those databases. So it just makes our lives a little easier. If we know that we're going to push this thing to Heroku, let's just, at the beginning, let's just go ahead and use Postgres, from the start. You can go back later, and if you've been playing around with SQLite in development or in your test environment, you can totally go back and put in Postgres later. It's not a huge deal, but again, just to be consistent from the start, we're just going to go ahead and use Postgres at the beginning. And then finally, I think Colin alluded to this last week. What does this -T flag do for us?
I think it'll exclude the test stuff from the app.
Yeah, perfect. So this is a little arbitrary. If I'm not going to use the test suite, I like to just omit it because, again, it's just more stuff that is going to clog up our app. It's really not that big a deal at the end of the day, but I kind of routinely just skip it so I have less files to work through. But the -T flag is going to skip the test suite. So Rails actually, if you're interested in testing, and if you've done the Hartle tutorial, he does kind of a test-driven development approach. Rails will scaffold out a pretty not too shabby basic test suite, very, very simple tests, but it gives you some scaffolding that you can build more complex tests on top of. So this -T is just skipping that, just to make our app a little more lightweight. So it's just kind of a personal preference. So we're going to skip that. So we hit enter, and Rails is going to bundle all of our gems that are in our gem file. It's also going to build out the directory structure. So after it's finished, go ahead and cd into your folder. And let's go ahead and open that up in Atom. The other thing while I'm thinking about it, go ahead and make sure that your Postgres engine is running. So you want to make sure that you have that little elephant up in the top dock of your Mac. So I'll go back and put that into the steps, but just want to make sure that you guys have Postgres running in the background. So make sure Postgres is running. Cool. So this next step is something that Colin walked us through last week. It's just kind of a good practice. So we're now in Rails 5, which I think is a pretty hearty improvement over Rails 4. And one of these configs that Colin changed last week, and so to be consistent, is we're going to change how error messages are delivered. So when we're dealing with an API-only Rails app, by the new Rails 5, Rails wants to deliver error messages via the format that you requested information in. So if we have some sort of error relating to HTML, it's going to give us that error in an HTML format. Given that we're dealing with the Rails API and JSON data only, Rails 5 wants to give us any kind of error messages in a JSON object, JSON format. And that's totally fine. But I think it's a little easier if we set this condition to default. And what default means is that it's just going to give us the error messages as HTML regardless, kind of the Rails 4 way of doing things. It's a really small thing if you want to look it up to get more information. But just to kind of be consistent with how you guys set up your apps last week, we're going to go ahead and add this. So this is actually going to be in your config environment development folder. So let's go ahead and go there. I don't know if you guys have been using this trick, but this really comes in handy with Rails because there's so many files. Some of them are named very similar. And one trick that I try to get into the habit of using, particularly with Atom, is a Command P. So Command P is like a very quick way to search files within the directory that you're in, so within our application. So for example, this will really come into play if we have, like a patient.rb model file. We have a patients_controllers.rb controllers file. So we have a couple of files that may start with the same letter, and searching through the, folders can sometimes be tedious. But if you do Command P, it'll open up this little window up here, and you can just start typing in. We don't have patients created yet, but we'll revisit this later. I'm going to try to use this consistently today. but this is a really good way to quickly find a file without using your mouse to click through the folders on the left and try to find the file. So again, the less that we touch this thing as a developer is a really good, makes us look pretty pro, and it is a very efficient way to do work. So we'll come back to that later. Anywho, let's find that config debug exception response format. So I forget if it's already in here or if we need to put it in.
We need to put it in.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, so just go ahead and add that in. You can put that anywhere. Just make sure that it's maybe like outside of this if-else conditional. I'll just stick it right here. And I'll put the comment right there. Cool. So it's just kind of a error message configuration there. All right, nice. So now let's go to the gem file, and we're going to make 2 changes in our gem file. So the gem file is in kind of the parent hierarchy here. So if we go to the gem file, so we're doing a little bit of setup to get this app up and running. However, this is still much less setup than we had to do with our Express and Node apps. So that should be a nice change of pace. Inside the gem file, we're going to use this rack cores gem, and I'm pretty sure Colin talked about this last week. So core stands for cross-origin resource sharing. There's a little bit of configuration to make sure that our server accepts requests from domains that aren't localhost 3000 or domains that aren't where we're deploying our Heroku app to. So if you want to read more about cores errors, it's just a load of fun. But luckily, Rails has this really nice Ruby gem rack-cores that helps to alleviate those errors for us. It does some configuration under the hood. So go ahead and uncomment that gem right there. It should be around line 21. And also while we're here, we'll play with this later, but let's go ahead and add the faker gem while we're in this file and adding stuff. So go ahead and add gem faker as well. And once you do that, go ahead and do a bundle install. So you can type in bundle install, or bundle should work as well. I forget if this is in my bash profile or if that's just some goodness that Rails gives you out of the box. Just a little bit of a shortcut there. Sorry, just making sure I pushed up the most recent version of our walkthrough, because I moved the bundle install down 1 line just so this wasn't confusing. But anyway, we want to add those 2 gems and then bundle install. Then we want to do one more configuration inside of our cores file, and I think we'll be good, and we can actually start building some data. Let's go into our config initializers core.rb file. So now that we uncommented out the rack cores gem and we bundle installed it, let's add a little bit of configuration to that. So just to demonstrate kind of the Atom shortcut, I'm going to do Command P and then just start typing in cores. And you can see that as I start typing, like it narrows it down. So the first file at the top is my cores.rb. So, you know, it saves me a little bit of keystroke, several keystrokes from having to take through the files. So once we get in here, we're pretty much just going to uncomment out the code from line 8 to 16, this Rails.application config middleware and such. And for now, what we're going to do is change this origins to a star. So you guys may have talked about this last week, but the gist of cores, again, this cross-origin request sharing, or cross-origin resource sharing, excuse me, we need to add some information to the headers in all of our requests. And so that's what this file and this gem is going to do for us. It's going to save us some heavy lifting. Right now, this is saying that our Rails API server is going to accept any request from any origin out there on the scary wide world of intrawebs. This is going to be fine for now. Later on, once we deploy to Heroku and such, we may want to get a little bit more specific with this origins. Maybe we want to specify it has to be like a localhost 3000 or a domain, or it has to be like a Heroku app domain or something. But for now, we're not doing authentication or anything today. So for now, just putting a star in there is going to be fine for our purposes. But just something to keep in mind. If you want to be a little bit more secure, you're going to want to dial in that origins a little bit better. Okay, cool. Is everyone good? So I'm sharing my screen. I can't see everyone's lovely face, but give me a thumbs up. If you're good so far. So if you wouldn't mind, just give me a quick thumbs up in Slack. That's pretty much all we need to do as far as like, you know, the configuration for this app. Now we can get to creating some models and playing around with our data. Okay, looks like we're in good shape. All right, cool. So let's move forward. So in order for us to even fire up a Rails server to play around with our data, even though we haven't really created any models or any kind of structure, we still need to create our database and migrate whatever little information we have, which is pretty much nothing at this point. We still need to run a Rails DB create and a Rails DB migrate just to make sure that our app is able to even render on localhost. So here, let's go ahead and run this command from the terminal. And you can actually do this on one line if you want. I think you can actually, no, we may need that and. And it's not letting me, so let's do those separate. I'm messing up the syntax. So go ahead and do a Rails DB create. What is my error that I'm getting? Let's see why it's barfing on me. My gosh, you guys. If I have one like fatal flaw as a developer, I always forget. Oh, actually, I'm in the wrong window. Sorry, I was checking to make sure I pushed up my lesson. I was not in my project window. So I was about to say, just make sure that you're actually in the correct project directory. That's totally my bad, you guys. But now we can do a Rails DB create. And that will create our databases, the development and test databases down in our Postgres engine. Remember that Rails out of the box gives us 3 databases, 3 environments, if you will. We're not really going to worry about the production database right now because we'll play around with that when we get to Heroku deployment. But go ahead and Rails DB create and then Rails DB migrate. And we should be good. So what does Rails DB migrate create for us? You guys remember?
A new table.
Well, it creates our schema file. So the first time we run Rails DB create, it initiates this schema file for us. Now, we don't have anything in the file because we haven't created any tables. That's what we're going to do next. But yeah, the first time you run rake DB migrate, it's going to create that schema. Notice we don't even have a migrations folder yet, right? So we won't have migrations until we actually create something worth migrating. We're going to do that here shortly. So Rails DB create and Rails DB migrate. So let's start with our first model. We're just going to start with the doctor. And like I said, last week you guys created these files. You touched these files, did it a little bit in a more manual way. Today, in the interest of time, we're going to do this using a Rails helper called Rails G for generate model. So I'm going to paste this into Slack, but we're going to type this out longhand, and we'll talk about what this is going to build for us. So this command, it's a Rails command because it's appended with Rails. And you can do G for short, but G just stands for generate. And I think Rails, our man pages, will should give us some options here. So if you just do Rails generate, it shows you all of the options, kind of the arguments that Rails will generate for you. So we can generate a controller, a model, that's what we're going to create now. It'll generate resources. It will scaffold stuff. So if you want to look up scaffold, scaffold is a way to create like a bunch of magic in one fail swoop, one command line command. So we're going to do a Rails generate, but we're going to generate a model. The name of this model that we're going to generate first is going to be our doctor model. Now, doctor from the command line, it doesn't have to be capitalized. Some documentation will capitalize it. Some will do it lowercase. I prefer doing an uppercase D when I create my models because models should always be singular and uppercase. So that's just the convention I like to use. Plus, if I'm putting a lot of stuff on into this command, it just helps it read a little bit better for me. So we're going to ask Rails to generate a doctor model. Then after that, we put in the arguments of the fields or attributes that we want this model to have. So in this case, we're going to do a name, space, a specialty. And let's stop right here. So maybe getting a little too magicalious, but one cool thing about Rails is that we want to make sure we put in the data type here. However, again, because Rails is a lot of magic, when we're creating models and such, if we don't specify a data type, so if we just said specialty, or if we just said name, Rails is going to assume we want it to be a data type of string. So it's just kind of an FYI thing. You could put colon string, or if you omitted string, it's going to just go ahead and make it a string for you. So just wanted to point that out. So we're going to have a name and a specialty. And these are arbitrary. These are just some that I thought up. You guys could probably come up with cooler ones. But insurance, I'm going to make this a Boolean. So again, since this is not a string data type, I must put the data type. I must designate it. So insurance is just going to be a Boolean. So does this doctor accept insurance, or does he or she not accept insurance? I probably could have named this something better, like accepts insurance or something like that. But for now, we'll just go with insurance. And then finally, I just put gender in here. Because I know when you search insurance, sometimes you can search by, languages they speak or by gender or something. So, and again, gender is going to be a string data type because I'm not putting anything at the end. Sting data type. However, if you want to, it's perfectly valid. You can totally specify colon string just to be explicit. But just to show you guys, I'm going to leave those off. So cool, this is going to be our command. We're going to ask Rails to generate a doctor model with name, specialty, insurance, and gender fields. Name, specialty, and gender are going to be data types of string, and then insurance will be a Boolean data type. So this is going to create two things. It's going to create a doctor.rb model file, and it's also going to create our migration that will run here shortly. So if that looks good, and I'm going to paste this into Slack if you want to copy it, because Colin had some really good points on this. We just want to make sure, I'm all for taking shortcuts, but we want to make sure particularly that we get the spelling and such correct, because if we mess something up here, sometimes it's a little bit painful to undo it. So we just want to make sure we have everything correct. And that looks good to me. So if you have that on the command line, go ahead and hit enter. And we should get some feedback. It's going to create two files. So it invokes active record, and then it creates one migration file and then one models file. So first, before we run the migration, let's take a look at that migrate file. So now that we've run our first migration in this brand new Rails API app, Rails went ahead and created the migrate folder for us. And let's open up that migration file. So you guys did this longhand last week. It's perfectly valid to just, maybe create or touch a create doctors migration file and then add the information in manually. That's totally valid. And a lot of people prefer to do that. But I just wanted to show you guys how you can use those Rails generate methods to do this as well. So all of this looks pretty solid. What is this crazy numerical hash thing at the beginning of the migration? What does that represent? Yep, go ahead.
That's date and time, right?
Yeah, so this is how Rails can keep the migration, like the order of the migrations in check. So this is actually, if you look really closely, 2016, 10/31, which is today, 2016. And then I'm not sure what time this is. Maybe this is like Greenwich Standard Time, looks 0630. So yeah, that timestamp on the migration is really important because they need to be run in a specific order. And so that's how Rails kind of keeps the order, keeps that integrity intact. Was there another question about something in the schema, in our migration file, excuse me? What does this t.timestamps do for us?
It adds created at and updated at.
Yep. Isn't that nice? Because remember in Rails we had to do like the schema with Mongoose we had to do like the schema.pre. We had to be more explicit about that to configure it. But Active Record is super sweet and just does that for us, which is awesome. It's also going to add a primary key of ID in our table. So notice that we didn't have to specify like t.string:_ID. That's something else that Active Record does out of the box for us. And we want Active Record to manage that integrity of our ID numbers. So, we don't get them confused or we don't assign the same ID to two different records or something like that. Cool. So that's it for the migration file. We're going to hold off on running migrate. We'll create our other two models before we run a migration. We don't really need to do it right now. We can wait a sec. The other thing I wanted to point out is let's go to the app models doctor.rb file. So let's go and look at the model itself. So we can go ahead and do a little bit of configuration in here, even though we haven't created our patient and our appointments models yet. We can go ahead and add some stuff in here. It's fine. So the first thing we're going to want to do is add a has many appointments. Because the way we're going to build this relationship is a doctor has many appointments. So we know that much. The other thing that I'm going to add in here, this is in the, it's in the screenshot that I put in there. I don't know if Colin talked about this last week. Well, we're also going to add this little thing. Dependent destroy. Has anyone seen that before, or does anyone want to take a stab at what that configuration is going to do for us?
It's going to get rid of floating information. Like let's say you delete a doctor and you don't want to leave their appointments floating without a doctor. So it will get rid of the doctor and everything else that is related to it.
Yeah, that's perfect. Absolutely. So if we delete a doctor from our app, we don't want that doctor's appointment still existing in our data database, right? So we want to be very proper. We could also put a dependent destroy on patients as well, because if a patient leaves our environment or leaves our app, we want to delete any appointments that patient may have on the books. The same thing if you close your Facebook account. Although the evil big Facebook folks probably store all of your information. You're never really deleted, but if you delete your stuff, they probably don't want other people's news feeds to still have access to your feeds or your friend connections and such, or maybe LinkedIn or something. So that's the idea. If we're going to delete one person, or one entity, let's delete all the other data that entity is dependent on, or vice versa. All the data that's dependent on that thing that we deleted. So that's what dependent destroy will do for us. We can go ahead and add a has many patients as well on the next line. And again, this pretty much this setup, it's coming pretty much straight from the Rails docs. So there isn't any secret magic or anything in here for the most part, except the dependent destroy and the validations we're going to add. I'm using this, for reference. So it's a really good practice to get used to reading the docs. And if you go through this page, there's just a ton of different relationships, for example. We've only talked about a few, but this is really good guidance if there's some other relationship you want to set up. So yeah, so let's also, while we're here, we're going to do a has many patients, but the important thing is that the doctor isn't going to be associated to a patient directly. It's going to be associated to a patient through that appointments, through that kind of middle model that we'll create. So on the second line, we need to tell our app that, spell that correctly, that our patients will be associated with doctors through the appointments model. And then finally, while we're here, just wanted to put in, because you guys went over it last week, we'll put in a very simple validation just to have it kind of set up. So we'll validate the name, for example, and we'll do a presence true. And we'll just make sure that it's unique. Make sure uniqueness is true. Now, usually for most full stack CRUD applications, the most important uniqueness that you'd want to have is probably on the email address, because most apps have you log in through their email. So you definitely want the email to be unique, but maybe some apps have a username that you can create or something like that. But again, just to have an example of a validation, we're going to put that on here. And there's a lot of really great validations. I know that you guys touched on that last week, but there's a lot of fun ones. There's a lot of really great ones you can create through regex to make sure that your email address has an @ symbol or a dot something, has a particular length requirement. Well, actually, Rails has built-in length requirements or minimum length, maximum length, things like that. But regex is also super helpful. Cool. So that's our doctor model. We could go ahead and run that one migration that we have. You could run that now if you wanted, but let's just go ahead and create our other two models, and then we'll run the migration. It's no biggie. So I'm going to, well, the answer's right here, but I was going to say the next thing I wanted you guys to do, let's create a patient model. And we want our patient to have the fields of name, which is a string. So if you don't want to look at the screenshot, insurance company, which is going to be a string, gender, which will be a string, and new patient. I was just trying to think of other stuff. So if you want to look at the screenshot, feel free, but see if you can create a patient model using the Rails G model command. Create a patient model with those attributes. Let me clean that up a little bit. And then while we're here, go ahead and create an appointment model. Actually, hold off on appointment because I want to point something out that we're going to do for that one. And then once you create that patient model, you can kind of see in that screenshot, go ahead and inside the patient model, the patient.rb, the model file itself, go ahead and add those has many relationships. And if you want to put the validations in there, that's fine. If you want to get some practice with that. And go ahead and give me a thumbs up in Slack when you've completed patient model. Then I'll go ahead and walk through this myself. So we're going to use that same command we used to generate a doctor. Should the name be unique for the patient? What if our patient is John Smith? Yeah, that's a good point. You can take that off. Like I said, you may want to do, maybe you want like the email to be unique or something. I just threw that in there as an example. But yeah, that's a really good point. Actually, for this one, I didn't even put an email field on there. So yeah, that's true. You may want to skip that, or I just put that validation in for an example. So I'm going to do a Rails G. So remember, you can do G or you can do generate. You can do it longhand model. And we're going to create a patient. And our patient is going to have fields / attributes of name, insurance company, gender, and new patient. And I'll make that a Boolean. I mean, there's a ton of patient information, right? I mean, usually I'm sure they would get like your address and your medical history. And actually, probably medical history is such a robust model. You'd probably want to maybe you'd want to create a whole other model or a whole other schema for medical history, because I'm sure there's like a lot of information you want to grab. But for now, just for our demo purposes, I'm going to generate a model with those attributes. And again, just to be redundant, so it's not confusing, omitting a data type on an attribute that we designate just means that it's going to make it a string by default. So if you had like a ton of fields or attributes and you wanted to save doing :string for each one, you can totally omit that if you wanted. So I'm going to generate my patient model. That'll create my migration file. I'll take a quick peek at that just to make sure everything's legit. So now I have a create doctors and a create patients migration files. I'll scoot that down here. So yeah, we could have done this manually if you wanted. We're just checking out the Rails generate model command. And then it's also creating our patient model. So for patient, it's going to look very similar to doctor. It's just going to be like kind of the inverse, right? So for our patient, a patient is going to have many appointments. And we can go ahead and put the dependent destroy here. Because again, if we delete a doctor, we want the appropriate appointments deleted. Or if we delete a patient, we want those appointments deleted as well. So we'll destroy that. And then a patient has many doctors through appointments also. So maybe you have, like a chiropractor and a general physician and a dentist, all sorts of doctors. And then Jason had a very valid point. I'm just going to leave the validation off of our patient for now. We have a version of a validation here on doctor. I guess the same thing could be for doctor. If we have two, like Dr. Roberts or something, that's probably not good, but just wanted to put a validation in there for reference. So give me a thumbs up in Slack when you have those two files created. And then we'll move on to appointments.
Mark, you have a typo on your patient RB on line 3 through.
Yep, thank you. Thank you very much. So I have 8 thumbs ups. All right, let's move forward. So Let's knock out appointment, and then we'll start playing around with actually creating some data in our Rails console and seeing how these relationships are really going to come in handy. So appointment has kind of a cool feature that we're going to pass in our Rails G model prompt that I just wanted to kind of bring to your attention. Let me paste this into Slack. So let's go ahead and create our Rails G model appointment. And we want appointment to have fields of location, day, the reason for the visit, and then these two flags, these two fields are kind of like the really cool ones that I wanted to point out to you. These are kind of optional. You can totally do this manually if you want, but just wanted to point out that Rails does give you a little bit of a shortcut if you want to use it. So if we want to associate this appointment model with any other model, we can do that when we instantiate the model to begin with and instantiate the migration file for this model. So this doctor : references tells Active Record when it builds the model and the migration file that this appointment has a belongs to relationship to doctor. So it references doctor. The same thing with patient, because an appointment is going to belong to a patient and belong to a doctor. So it's not a huge thing, but it is kind of neat if you want to use it. This is going to do a couple of things. One of the big things it's going to do is it's going to go ahead and add a belongs to method to the model file itself. So that saves us like 2 lines of code if you want. And I think it also adds some indexing to our migration file. We need to check that out to make sure that the foreign key and primary key relationship, there's some integrity there. But I just wanted to point out this references, this isn't necessarily a data type, but it is telling Active Record that there's a primary foreign key relationship here. This is also going to put a doctor_ID field on appointment and a patient_ID field on appointment. And that's how we're going to make sure that the patient and doctor are related associated through this appointment model. So this : references is kind of cool. It's a nice little shortcut. It isn't doing anything that we couldn't do ourselves, but if it's something you're comfortable with using, it's kind of a fun little shortcut. So let's do a Rails generate model. This will be our last one that we generate. And we're going to generate an appointment. And so this appointment, I'm going to put a location because sometimes, maybe this doctor is located in different places, going to meet him or her in different spots. Put a day on there. Technically, if I went back and did this, I would probably make this like a : date time type of data type, but I wanted to play around with that calendar feature in Materialize, so I just left this as a string to make it easy. But you guys, if you want to go back and change that later. I'll put the reason for the visit here, and then the doctor references and the patient references. Again, just wanted to make sure that I didn't misspell something. And it looks all right to me. I'll paste this into Slack as well, just in case there's any confusion. There you go. Cool. So that is going to generate a migration file and our appointment model. Let's take a look at the migration file first, just to see what it created for us. So if we take a look at the schema here in the migration, or what it's going to add to the schema, since we used that : references command when we generated our appointment model, one of the cool things that it did is it went ahead and added, this is going to add a doctor_ID field, and it's going to designate that this contains a foreign key for doctor, and also a patient_ID that is going to contain the foreign key for the patient that this appointment belongs to. So there's some Rails Active Record magic going on under the hood. For example, this shouldn't let us save an appointment with a patient or a doctor ID that doesn't exist, for example. So before it actually persists something to the database, if we put in a patient ID of 1,000 and we only have like 50 folks in our database, then it's probably going to do a DB rollback. It's not going to let us persist that record. So there's a couple other cool things that that foreign key method is doing for us. And then if we check out the appointment model right here, again, we could have put a couple keystrokes and created a belongs to doctor and belongs to patient, but that references when we, Rails G model appointment, that colon references just went ahead and threw that in there, which is nice. The one thing that won't do is it won't add the reverse relationship. So that references wouldn't add a has many appointments to our doctor or a has many appointments to patient. So that's why we needed to put those in manually. And we'll only add a belongs to relationship to that model. We'll make this a little larger, and let me put my patient down here. Cool. So these are the three models that we created so far. So we have a doctor, appointment, and patient. And so this is pretty much what we want them to look like. If you want to I put another validation in the lesson. I validated the location on appointment. Again, I wasn't really overthinking that. I just was putting in an example of validates so you guys would have an example of it. So I'm going to leave that off, but I just wanted to remind us about the optional validations that we can put on here. So now that we have that, let's see, we have a question. Is index true, not necessarily in the reference? What does it do if it's in there? Rachel, are you talking about the migration file?
Yes.
So so you do not see index. Is that something you guys put in last week?
Yeah, so for the homework, I did the references, so patient, foreign key true, and then index true.
Yeah, so the index, it does it's a little computer sciencey. I think we talked about, maybe Colin talked about it last week. But yeah, so if you're having a really large data set, sometimes putting that index on a particular, into your schema. Remember, an index is just like, the index of a book. So instead of searching, if I was looking for patients with the last name of W for right, instead of searching A through Z patients, I could add like a B. Rails uses, Active Record uses a B tree, a binary tree type of indexing structure to index this database. So you could put it in there if you wanted. The amount of data we're using, it's not going to make a difference. But if you were going to have a lot of data, you could totally put in the index true, just to be a little bit more proactive with that if you wanted. But yeah, it just makes your searches much more efficient. So instead of searching A through Z patients, it'll just search like W through Z, and it knows where in the database to find the data for last names W through Z or something. Yeah. Any other questions before we run our Rails DB migrate? And then just to kind of reaffirm what we just did, we could have ran a migration after each time we created a model. You totally could have done that. Just kind of waiting till we created all three migrations and then, dumping into the schema in one command. But if you want to do it after each one, that's totally fine. You can Rails DB migrate to your heart's content.
Hey, Mark, question with that.
Sure.
By doing it all at once, does that give us a rollback to all of them if we messed up and wanted to roll it back? Whereas if we did it individually, it'd just give us to our last migrate?
It's still going to just roll back to the last migration file. That's what a rollback will do.
So even if you did them all at once, it'll just give you they'll pick one or whatever?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Every time you run Rails DB migrate, whether you have 3 files or 100, it's going to run everything in that migrate folder, which is why it's really important. Like Colin mentioned, if some other dev, if several people are working on the same project, it's really important that you guys have this the same integrity in your migration files. If anything is consistent, you need to make sure that your migration files are solid, because then individually you all can recreate your local databases just by running that migrate folder. That's why we don't want to, well, for one thing, we don't want to change our schema manually. So remember, I think Colin gave us the riot act for that one, right? We don't want to go into our schema file and just change that manually, because we want to let the migrations do that. So if we want to drop a database, drop a table, or maybe rename a column name, or change our day from a string data type to like a date, date time data type, we want to make sure we create a migration for that, because then when this app is disseminated between other people that are using it, we can all have the new migrations, just run a RakeDB migrate, and we'll all be up to speed, and our schemas will be in sync. So yeah, it's really important to try to, even if it's something really small, even if like I created a patient folder instead of patient table instead of a patient's table, it would still be a best practice to create a migration and either like drop that table or rename that table rather than just changing it and running it. So cool. Let's see if there's any more questions and we will migrate. Yeah, let's take a break actually. Yeah, we're at break time. Thanks for reminding me. So let's run this last command and then we'll take a break. And if anyone's having issues, I'll stick around and help you guys out. But now that we've created all of our migrations, all of our models and such, let's go ahead and run a Rails DB migrate and populate that schema.rb file. Cool. And there we go. And by the way, it's kind of a side note, but there's a very specific reason that we created the models in this order, even though we ran the migrate at the end. If we had created like appointments second and created patients last with these timestamps, we would have gotten to appointments and it would have tried to create a table for appointments, and it would have said, oh, this patient references doesn't exist. I don't know what a patient is. Because again, the order of this migration folder is really important. So just the simple fact that we created appointments last, because appointments belong to patients and doctors, there's a very specific reason that we created them in this order, with creating the two doctors and patients first and then appointments last. Otherwise, it would have barfed on us. Cool. So I'll stick around if there's any issues. Give me a thumbs up in Slack if that worked successfully. You should see that your schema file has a lot more meat now, has a lot more information. And then go ahead and, yeah, let's meet back at 12:44. And actually, Rachel, if you're there, actually, I'd forgotten that when we use that references flag, if you notice when we run the Rails DB migrate, that the other cool thing that Active Record does for us is it goes ahead and adds the indexing using B-tree. So it went ahead and added that for us, which is pretty cool. So that's yet, we could have done that manually, but using that Rails G model generator saved us a little bit of a couple of keystrokes, which is pretty nice. We'll get to it. So I put a screenshot into Slack. So what I want you guys to do is go ahead and type Rails C, which is short for Rails console. Go ahead and type that into your terminal window. Make sure that you're inside the app directory. So for Rails C, it's very important that we are in the directory that we want to enter, because Rails C loads up that Rails app inside an embedded Ruby, interactive Ruby environment. So as opposed to accessing our database or something where we can do that from any folder, any directory, for Rails C, it's very important that we're actually in the app that we want to play around with. The other thing, if you look at that number 2, I think last week, this may pertain to like Aaron, maybe some other folks, but I know that a couple of folks are having some Rails C issues. So just ignore step 2. If you're having an issue, like let me know. And that's just kind of a quick and dirty fix for that. We'll like do the better fix later, but I just put that in there in case we're having any issues. I don't really think we will, but if you aren't having any issues, then just ignore step 2 right there. That's just kind of in case there's any accidents. Let me share my screen and let's go into Rails console and play around with some data. And I'll try to make my, my window nice and readable here. Cool. So I'm in my app directory, Rails 5 API demo, and then let's go into Rails C. So you can do Rails console, you can do Rails C. It's just a shortcut for the Rails console. And so we can see we're not using the pry gem like you guys did last week. We could use that if we wanted, the pry Rails gem. For today's lesson, we're just going to use the plain old interactive Ruby environment, which will be fine. We're not going to spend a lot of today like putting in debugger type messages into our code. So let's make sure that our app is wired up correctly. Let me put some steps into Slack, and we'll walk through these one at a time. And we'll kind of walk through what we're doing here. The reason that we want to test out our code in Rails C is because it's like the first step of the path of least resistance. So again, before I try to create some sort of form, some sort of views, before I even go into Postman, this is like getting directly, onto the metal. We can make sure that our associations are set up correctly before we try to add complexity to our app. So like one of the really quick things I could do is I could just type in patient.new and just see if that returns anything. And I can see here that that does return an empty patient object. Now, all of these values are nil, specifically like the patient ID, the created at and updated at are nil because they won't be created until I actually do like patient.save or patient.create or something. But this is just a really quick check to make sure that I have that patient model information available to me. This also confirms that my tables have been created. So that's just like in one fell swoop, just making sure that my app is set up correctly. All right, so if you want to look at those instructions, let's do number 1. So let's create a patient into our database just to make sure this is working. I'm going to assign this patient to a variable called P. That's probably not the best. I probably should call this like patient or something, but I'm just going to use P for now. And then let's go ahead and do a patient.create. And remember the difference between, or does someone want to describe the difference between using .create versus like using a .new? We're trying to instantiate a new instance of something. What's the difference between using those separate? Yeah, so create equals new and save. Can you guys think of a reason why that may be, why, if we could do it all with just .create, why on earth we want to do like a .new and a .save separately? Like what would be an advantage or a use case for doing that? Why is that available to us? I do hate being efficient. That is absolutely correct. That's a no-brainer for me.
Maybe there's some steps in between that you want to do before you finish.
There's absolutely some steps in between. If anyone's interested in checking out testing, for example, testing's a really good example of this. So if I'm wanting to test out my database, let's say that I want to create like, there's gems that will, kind of like the faker gem, that will create thousands, hundreds, thousands, whatever, just random instances of data to test out your database to make sure that it's watertight and such. Let's say that I want to play around with some data, but I don't actually want to save it to the database because that would like really fill up my database and I'd have to go back and delete it and such. Maybe I just want to create new instances of things so I can play around with the data, kind of kick the tires with my validations or with certain associations or whatever. Maybe I just want to do .new on a lot of pieces of data, but not save it to the database. So that's one way to do it. Speaking of that, there's also another way to enter a Rails C environment. So in this example, we actually do want to create some patients and doctors and appointments that we can play around with. You could also enter what's known as like the Rails C sandbox. I'll put this into Slack. I don't know if Colin mentioned this last week. But you can also go into your Rails console with the -- sandbox flag, and it'll give you that prompt. It'll tell you that you're in a sandbox. Any data that you save or whatever will just be removed when you close out of that environment. So sometimes that's a nice option. You can just go into sandbox and not worry about if you're actually saving stuff to the database. Just FYI. Okay, so go ahead and create a patient. I'm going to create one patient. If you guys want to create 1 or 2 or 3 just to get some practice. But we're just confirming that we can save a patient, save a doctor, and that we can save an appointment and have that association work. So also have insurance. I forget if this was insurance or insurance co. Yeah, this is insurance co. Do anthem. What else do we have here? Gender and new patient, which is a Boolean. And it's new patient. And we'll just say true. I think that's right. Were those all of our fields? Name, insurance company, gender, new patient, true. Cool. All right, so let's run that. And again, the beautiful thing about Active Record, all those crazy SQL statements that we struggled through last week, Active Record does that for us. And we can even see that, we can see the prompts here. Begin, then SQL, here's the query that Active Record kind of translates for us. And then what's returned is our new patient object. And I can confirm that because it has patient ID and it also has a created at and updated at, which are the same thing right now. But once I have that patient ID and that created at field, then I can, be confident that it was persisted correctly. So that's cool. I could also do just like a really quick patient.all to grab all the patients. And there's my Active Record relationship array with all of my patients, even though I just have one at the moment. So yeah, so that looks good. Let's go ahead and add a doctor as well. So we'll go doctor, and we'll just do create to make it easier. So I'll create a Dr. Robert, specialty, insurance, and gender. So you guys can use my example, or if you want to use something else, that's fine. Feet. And I'll just say false. And gender, just say M for male. And what did I misspell? My goodness. Doctor, create name, specialty, feet, insurance, false. Gender M. Let's see. Undefined method has many. Okay, this is good. So I did something, or I might have misspelled something in our model. So I'll go back and check that out. Yep, I bet I misspelled has many and has many. So if you're following along, I hope you didn't do the same thing. So there it is on line 3. What a dum-dum. So that should be has many, obviously. But this is a really good thing. So actually, I just made a change to my Rails app, but I have the previous version still loaded in my Rails console. How can I reload my Rails app without exiting out of my Rails console? Did you guys talk about that last week? There's a really cool, quick and dirty way to do that.
You can just say reload with exclamation, right?
Yep. Reload bang, and that'll reload it. It's a small thing. I mean, you could exit out and come back in, but the good thing about just reloading is that I still have that previous data. So maybe if I was entering in a bunch of patients and then I screw up my doctor, I'm like, oh man, I've got to like re-enter all that data. But the good thing about using that reload bang is that it still maintains the in memory, the commands that you had just done. So I'll put that in here. That's a really good handy one to know about. Okay, cool. So now that my doctor's all straightened out, let me try to run this again. Let's see what it's barfing at me now for. Oh my gosh, you guys. I am so sorry. I need some more caffeine this morning. Can't get my spelling right. Okay, finally, there we go. So if you get everything spelled correctly, we can now see that a doctor has been inserted into the database, just like the patient, which is awesome. Specialty is misspelled, I think. Well, that does sound like me. I'll check that out. Thanks for the heads up. Yeah, I'll check out the spelling. Cool. So we have a patient and a doctor. So now let's see kind of the manual way to create an appointment with these two entities. So that's the step 3 right here. let's create an appointment. I'm going to assign this to a variable A just so it's easier to pull it back up here in a few steps if we want to add more information or if we want to call on it. So let's do an appointment.create. And our fields are, let's do a location. So just make up something here. What other fields? Day, reason, doctor, and patient ID. Okay. Reason. So you got like a backache. The day. So for now, until we get to like the date time, I'm just going to put in a string of Monday. You could put in like an actual date if you wanted, but I hadn't quite gotten, I hadn't written that migration yet to change that officially to date time. And then we have any other fields other than Dr. ID? Okay, cool. And so now we can add the foreign keys. So Dr. ID, we only have one doctor right now. So it'll be Dr. ID of 1. And the patient ID, we only have one patient. So it's going to be a patient ID of 1. And if we run that, so it looks good. And notice the active record / SQL query. So it's actually going into the doctor's table and confirming that there's a doctor with an ID of 1. It's also confirming that there's a patient in the patient's table with the patient ID of 1 as well. So it's doing a little bit of like just sanity checking for us. And then we see that that appointment was created. So Mark, that's really cool. I could have done that on my own. What's the big deal with like a has many through association? Well, kind of the power of these associations is that now we can get all the doctors for a patient through that appointment directly. We don't have to do like doctors.appointments.patients. We have that direct association. So let me do this. I'd save that doctor as D, but I don't like that. It's not very specific. So let me resave that. I'm going to do, let's make a doctor variable. And I'm going to assign this to doctor.last. So remember in Ruby and Active Record, we have a .last, we have a .first method, which is really handy. We only have one doctor, but just for this demonstration, I want to make sure that it's not just like the letter D variable. So I'll assign the doctor to doctor.last. So now, if I wanted to see all of the patients that belong to this doctor, I'm going to type in the doctor that I'm looking for, which is doctor. This is the only doctor we have, which is assigned to a variable. And I'm going to say, hey, go into the patients table for this doctor and pull back all the relevant patients. So I can do doctor.patients, and Active Record knows what we're asking for. And check out this crazy SQL statement that it created. So select patients from patients, doing an inner join. So we talked about joins on Thursday. Doing an inner join, appointments on patients, patients.id equals appointments.patients._id. So again, with the join, we need to tell the SQL statement, what column are we trying to join these two tables on? And so for this one, we're using the foreign key of patient ID. And so we can see what's returned. I have one patient with the name of Schmitty. And notice that this patient record doesn't have any doctor_ID field. It doesn't have any foreign key of doctor directly on it, right? Because the foreign keys are stored in appointments. So it kind of just like went through appointments to patients, grabbed the patients, and brought it back around. So you can do doctor.patients. The other thing that you can do is you can do the opposite. So what if I want to see all of the doctors that this patient uses? So previously I did P for patient. That's not a very great description. So let me do patient, and I'll do a patient.last just to grab that one patient, or patient.first, whatever. Make sure I spelled that right. Find method last. I didn't think I misspelled that, but. So patient.last. And so now I can do the same thing I did with doctors. If I wanted to see all the doctors that this patient visits, I can do patient.doctors. and the doctors. And an array is actually returned, a collection, if you will. You can see that here, an active record associations collection. And even though we only have one doctor, it's still returned as an array. So we can do any kind of array enumeration type of method on this collection, like a .each or a .map, those kinds of things. So if I have any questions, still the misspelling. And then finally, the other association that we have, and you can see it in the markdown, we can also look at the appointments for a patient or the appointments for a doctor. Obviously, those are kind of the lowest hanging fruit. So I could do doctor.appointments and see the appointments for that doctor. And then I could do the same thing with patients. Patient.appointment. And kind of the tricky thing to keep in mind, well, the reason that we're going into Rails console to play around with this code is that this is literally the same code we're going to put into our Rails controller. So this is a great environment to kind of play around with the commands, the queries that we want to write for active record. But one of the tricky things I just want to invite you guys to be mindful of is that when you write these associations, sometimes it can be a little bit confusing because here we have a singular doctor, but we're doing .appointments. So I just want to, kind of make you mindful of that because occasionally maybe you'll make it, this plural and this singular or the opposite. So the way that this reads is, find me the one doctor that we assign to that variable of doctor. Find me all of the appointments in the appointments table for that doctor. So that's kind of how it reads. So it's generally like the singular dot the plural of what you're looking for. Another way to write that if I didn't want to assign it, I could also do like doctor dot first dot appointments. I could do that the same way. I only have one doctor, so it's the same doctor, but could also probably do a find. So if I wanted to do doctor find, and then remember that our find method takes the ID. It doesn't take an index. So this is finding the doctor with the ID of 1, and then find me all of the appointments for that doctor. So I could do that as well. Any questions so far? dpatients doesn't work for me, but dpatient does. Yeah, we should take a look at that. That shouldn't work. That's interesting. And then the other thing is that, these examples, again, I'm pulling them directly from the Rails guides. So if you go here, here's a really, basic example of how to call physician.patients equals patients or something, but the documentation can sometimes be helpful. Yeah, Rachel, if you want to hang tight, I'm happy to take a look at that with you here in a bit. So that's how we can access patients and doctors through appointments. The other cool thing about this has many through association is that we can also create new patients directly from a doctor. Not only can we create an appointment for a doctor, but we can also create a new instance of a patient for a doctor. And so let's take a look at how to do that in this next section. Cool. So this is just these are just a couple of examples. Again, we're going to seed our database when we start doing our Postman stuff, but it's really important to be able to go into the Rails console and test this stuff out. So this number 1, we have a d.patients.create. So this is saying that doctor that we have stored in a variable, create a new instance of patient in the patients table. That's kind of how that reads. So if you want to code along, I still have my doctor, my D variable. I still have it here. But so this reads a little bit better. I'm going to do a doctor. This is the same doctor. I just, I'll update those to be a little bit better than just a D. But let's do a doctor.patients.create. And then we can pass in the attributes for this particular patient, just like we were doing a capital P patient.create. And it'll automatically be connected to this doctor. So this one I use Diesel. We'll just go ahead and make one up. Whatever you guys want to put in here. So we'll have a name of Diesel. What else do I have? Insurance company. Maybe Aetna. What else? Gender, and then new patient. And then new patient. And I know I have that error there. I need to go back and fix that. Like that. So that looks okay. New patient, true. So if we run that, insert into patients. So we created a new patient. And then this also kind of under the hood is keeping track of that association, the association between the patient and the doctor through the appointments table. So now just to check this out, I could do a patient.last just to confirm that that one was saved. And indeed it was. So this patient has an ID of 2, has a name of Diesel and such. And now when I do doctor.patients, I should have 2 patients returned. Like so. So now I have, here's the first one, patient ID of 1, who is Schmitty, and a patient ID of 2, who is Diesel. So again, I didn't have to do a patient.new separately and then somehow connect that to a particular doctor. You can do it all in one fell swoop with these active record associations. Then you can do like a doctor.patients.count just to get like the quick and dirty number of patients that way. Let's see if there's any questions. Jason gets location can't be blank when I try to create Diesel. That's because you left the validate location in your model. Yeah, that's a good call. Yeah, I think, let's see. Yeah, if you want to take out those validations for now, it's just a reminder to kind of go over what those validations do and how we put them in our model. Let me pause for a second and come off screen. Is anyone having any other issues that I can help with? Like maybe Rachel, if you want to take a look at your issue, we'll put a pin in it for a minute.
I also have a problem. I'll go after Rachel.
Okay. So Rachel, you want to share your screen? We'll take a look at your singular and plural issue.
Yeah, I may have fixed it. I'm not sure. I was trying to do the doctor patients create, because I figured that would tell me if I fixed it or not, but I don't know, now I'm just like stuck in something.
Okay. You want us to come back to you?
Yeah, you can.
Okay, cool. Sanaz, do you want to share your screen? We'll take it.
Sure. I'm getting errors about like gem file bundle install. I did install my bundle, but when I run this command here, I get back this.
Yeah, so type in D there in the console.
Just
D, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, hit enter. Okay, so yeah, your D variable is not assigned. I don't know if you closed out or something, because you tried to do d.patients.create and it doesn't know what D is. So you could assign D to.
Okay, I remember I did earlier. Okay, D.
Yeah, if you scroll up, because it looks like you're on IRB, line number 2. So I bet that maybe you exited out and came back in or something. Could that be the case?
Maybe.
Yeah, so it probably just emptied out the memory.
Okay.
So how would you get the last doctor? Is it singular or plural? So remember, we're asking for an instance of a doctor model.
Yeah.
So it needs to be, yeah. So remember, it's capital and it's singular.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the model. It's not the table. That's the model we're looking for, yeah. Yeah, so run that, and that should assign that last doctor, which I think is our only doctor.
Yeah, I know.
So there you go. Yeah, so I think you're good. So try those commands again. The D dot, and I use D and P for brevity. I'll throw like doctor and patient in there, make it a little clearer.
Oh, okay. So it's not going to work for patients. I mean, okay.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So that patients refers to the patients table.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool. That looks good.
Thank you.
Sure. Who else is barfing? Sean and Farouk, are you guys were those validation issues?
Yeah, it's just validation issues. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Is anyone else having any issues? So yeah, Jason?
When I do d.patients.create, it's telling me undefined, all right, no, it's, where'd it go? Okay. I was trying to do some other things, and so I was trying to figure out a way to make it work, and now I've lost the error.
Okay,
I do
cool.
d.patients.create, and I just copied and pasted from the markdown. I also typed it out. I get, you cannot call create unless the parent is saved. Now, D does come up with information. If I type in D, I get, doctor ID, name Dr. Robert, specialty feet, etc.
Okay. Do you want to share your screen? We can take a look.
Sure, we can do that.
Okay.
So if I do D, I get that.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, so D is not saved. See how Dr. ID is nil? So if you're going to set up that relationship, you need to do like d.save, because if it's going to attach the foreign key, primary key relationship, D needs to have that ID. It's still nil. Okay. So
because I did D equals doctor.create.
Yeah. So this may be something with your validation still. So see how it rolls back. So it's not locking something. Do this for me. Do a d.save with a bang with an exclamation point. Okay, so this is a really important something to keep in mind, you guys. So notice how Jason, when he did d.save, it just said begin and then roll back. So rollback is active record telling you that, like, I tried to save this, I tried to do what you wanted, but something happened, and so I'm rolling back that attempt to save this data. Now, that's great and all, but there's not a lot of information, right? It just returns false, but I don't know why it didn't like that save. But this is a really handy tip for Rails and Ruby in general. If you do a bang, that save exclamation point, it makes Ruby return better errors. So notice when Jason tried to do it with save exclamation point, now we get some other helpful garbage. And so now underneath that rollback, it says record invalid, validation failed, name has already been taken. So do you already have Dr. Robert in the database, perhaps?
Not that I know. I just had this one. Well, this was weird.
Yeah, so that's why that's failing, because you may still have that validates like name, presence, uniqueness true. So that's why I won't save it.
Okay.
But if you just hit the up arrow for a couple of times and recreate that object, but instead of Dr. Robert, change it to something else, it should be fine.
Okay. I got it. I'm not sure why that happened. So I did a d.create earlier. I don't know. All right. Well, thank you.
Okay. I'll put that into Slack. Adding an exclamation point to a method will return better error information. Yeah. Anyone else having any issues? Cool. Okay, so let's wrap this up, and then we'll actually get to creating some controller methods, and then actually testing this out with Postman before we push it up to Heroku. So let me share my screen. We're pretty much through. Again, just wanted to demonstrate kind of the power of these relationships and how you can. It just saves you a lot of code because you can create things with less code if you set up these relationships correctly. So I had created, where were we? I'd created a patient through a doctor, and you can also create a doctor through a patient. I won't bore you guys with that, but some sample code is here in the README. For example, I could do P, which stands for patient, the patient variable. I could do p.doctors.create. You can also do like patient.appointments.create. So you can also create an appointment that is automatically attached to a patient. You could also create an appointment that's automatically attached to a doctor, like so. Yeah, and then this last example is just one more way to write it. And let me put this into Slack. Just like another neat little trick. So in this example, I'm creating a new appointment. I'm just assigning it to a variable A2. But the cool thing I wanted to point your attention to is that if you're in the Rails console and you already have like a doctor assigned to a variable and maybe a patient assigned to a variable, in this example, to create a new appointment, if you'll notice the doctor _ ID field, instead of putting in a number, so let's say that I don't know the ID of this particular doctor that I saved to this D variable. If I don't know Dr. Roberts' ID, you can also just do like D.ID. So you can put the variable name .ID, and the same thing for patient. So if I didn't know Diesel's patient ID or Schmidt's patient ID, you can also do, P.ID or whatever, variable you've saved that into. So just another nice little shortcut there I wanted to point out to you guys. So any questions before we move into like creating some CRUD, some controller methods, so we can play around with some CRUD? Any questions? Okie dokie. All right, cool. So let's get started. We're not going to get through this before lunch. So what I wanted to do here is maybe let's walk through creating, let's say, a doctor's controller, and then I want to give you guys some time to try to create a patients and an appointments controller, and give you guys a little bit of lab time to work on that. So let's go ahead and see if we can knock out one of these before lunch, or we'll just get as far as we can. So for this one, let me get out of my Rails console, and I'll get back here to the project directory. So Dr. CRUD, let's work on this. Now, all of the code is in the README if you want to use it. I tried to keep this as kind of as lean as possible, kind of based on how Colin presented this on Friday. So if you have any questions, please let me know. But all the code is here, but I want to walk through each method. There's 4 methods here, 5 if you include the private method. And just kind of in a sense of getting a little bit of a review, we'll walk through this together and then give you guys some time to work on the other ones on your own. So the first thing I'm going to do, here's another handy Rails method, Rails G controller doctors. So again, we could create our controller file from scratch. I just wanted to show you guys another little quick and dirty shortcut if you want to use it. So if you guys want to type in, I'll put this into Slack. Rails G controller doctors. So go ahead and run that. And it just created one file for us, right? And it knows where to put that file because we're asking it to create a controller file for us. So in our app controllers directory, it created a doctors _ controller file. So remember that controllers, when we put in the arguments, generally they're lowercase and they're always plural because controllers are plural. They manage all of our doctors. Now let's take a quick peek at that file. So if you want to go into controllers, and there's our doctor's controller. Again, I didn't add that much goodness here. We could have put some more arguments here on the command line, and it would have actually scaffolded out fully formed methods and such, the RESTful actions that we wanted. But we're just keeping it pretty simple here today. So just wanted to demonstrate that this will create a doctor's controller in the correct folder. So at least it gives us a little bit of scaffolding here, or it gives us 2 lines of code, but it's something to start with. So let's kick off with an index action. So that's going to look like def index, and we'll end it. And then how would we, using Active Record, how would we get access to all of our instances of a doctor? And you can put that into Slack. Again, the code's in the README, but if anyone hasn't spoiled the surprise, yeah, doctor.all for sure. So since we're not using views, we're going to be sending all this back as JSON data. So hopefully you guys will see a pattern. Rails is all about patterns and kind of modularity and reusability. So hopefully you'll see some of this and it'll just start to click. So I'm going to create a doctors variable just to put all those doctors into. So doctors equals doctor.all. And so when we get a request to this method, we're going to, instead of render some sort of view, we're going to render JSON. And so I think this should be pretty similar to how you guys set it up last week. I think you guys may have actually put a hash in here and you returned like a message, like a 200 or something like that. So you can put those messages in here if you want. I just didn't put them in this lesson. So actually, I think we can go ahead and test this out. So we can just do this maybe quickly one at a time and make sure these are working. So now that I have a controller, what do I need to do before we can test this out in Postman? So we've made sure that doctor.all works in Rails console in the database. I now have a controller action for index that will return all the doctors. But can you guys think of like the final little piece that we have not added yet?
The actual route for it?
Yeah, so the route. Generally, you would create the route first. Rails is very good with error messages, and generally, like the route would be the first thing that fails. If we were doing this in like if you do like the Michael Hartle tutorial, for example, that'll be kind of the first thing he does. But yeah, let's go into our config, and let's go into the routes file. And you guys played around with resources last week, I believe, and so we're going to do the same thing here. So what does this resources method do for us? What is this magic resources : doctors, this symbol of doctors? So do you guys remember the Rails command if I wanted to see all of the routes that I have available to me in my app? Do you guys remember what that command is? You can put it into Slack or... Yeah, Rails routes. So given that this is an API-only Rails application, what is this resources method going to give to us? If we rake the routes, what are we going to see? Well, let's check it out. So if you want to run a Rails routes, so we're actually getting 5-ish routes. So we're getting an index out of the box, a create, a show, an update, and a destroy. So that's pretty cool. What resources does, I'm sure Colin mentioned this, is, again, Rails is convention over configuration. And when we use that resources method, it's supposed to give us the 7 RESTful actions, the 7 like basic CRUD actions for most applications. Now, since this is an API only API only app, what 2 routes are we not getting, and why are we not getting them? So resources usually gives us 7, but we're only getting 5 here. I feel like we're getting, a little janky here with Rails, a little stingy. But why are we only getting 5 instead of 7? Jason's being told, I have no routes and I need to add some routes. Yeah, so if your routes.rb is completely empty, just add this line to it. Yeah, maybe don't forget to save. This is what your routes.rb should look like. You can get rid of that comment, the 4 details on the DSL if you want. But let me put this question into Slack. So why are we getting only 5 routes instead of 7? So when we use that resources method, it's supposed to give us the 7 RESTful routes for a given resource. But our app's only giving us 5. It's giving us index, create, show, update, and destroy. What are the other 2 that we're not getting? Less used routes. Okay. What are the two RESTful actions that are not included right here? So when you think about your Ninja RESTful routing, which could pertain to Rails or to our Express apps, if you guys look at that screenshot, what two routes are we not getting? Looks like we have like an index route, a create route, a show route, update route, and then destroy. What are we missing? Thanks, Silent Bob. Okay, we'll see what Tom is typing, and then we'll move forward.
I was going to say, it's not that long ago.
Yeah, nice. Yes, thank you, Tom. Yeah, we're not getting the new and the edit routes because they showed the new and the edit views. Yeah, because the new and the edit, we can still grab JSON for an index, right, without a view associated with it. But new and edit are pretty much just forms. And I can't really think of a use case for new and edit if we have an API-only application. So yeah, thanks, Tom. So that's why we don't have the new and the edit routes with our Rails API. But if this is a fully fledged Rails view engine, when we use this resources, it would give us all 7. So it's just kind of a small thing, but I just want to make sure that we're aware that this is an API app versus a fully 7 RESTful routes with views and stuff. But we're using Angular for our views. Okay, cool. Thanks for that. Didn't want to belabor the point. Cool. Now that we have our routes, let's do a quick test using Postman. I know we have 3 minutes, so let's just knock this out, and then we'll go to lunch and finish this up after. So someone put it in earlier. The first step we need to do, because I think our routes are tight, we have one, where's my controller file? Yeah, we have one route. So now we can test something out. So let's go ahead and run a Rails server, or Rails S, if you will, just for conciseness sake. Running on localhost 3000. Cool. So we could actually test this out the really quick and dirty way. If you want to go to your localhost 3000, and if you want to put that in the browser, yay, you're on Rails. So the thing we need to do is we need to go to doctors, because /doctors is going to be our index route rather. And so there we go. So you guys should all see, I only have one doctor. You guys may have more, but yeah, so you should have that rendering. And give me a thumbs up in Slack if you have one doctor, at least one doctor. Browser at localhost 3000 doctors. So give me a thumbs up in Slack if you guys have something rendering. Now to test out, a post route, to create something, to delete something, we will need to use Postman for that. But cool, that's a lot of thumbs up. That's great. The last thing, and then we're going to go to lunch, is if you notice in my example, so this is my Heroku example. Remember how we put this cool little name spacing like /API? It's just a nice little kind of pro polish that we're going to put on our app, just to designate that this is just an API serving JSON. It's not, if we did have views with this app, that may be an entirely different path. So there's a really cool, quick way to do this in Rails. We can use some name spacing using a path, kind of a path key pair value here. So I'll paste this into Slack and just do a comma path. This will go into our routes file. And so now we have the resources for doctors. However, I want the path to have access to that controller and those methods and such. I'm going to namespace it with API doctors. So we can tell Rails, a little bit more specifically, I only want to see this if I get a request from, to API/doctors. So you can save that. I'm going to restart my server. Sometimes Rails servers are they're not quite as efficient as Node and NodeMon. So if you want to restart just to be sure, now if I refresh my doctors, I shouldn't get anything. So no route matches get doctors. However, I do have a /API/doctors, which is exactly what I want. So now I'll need to go to API/doctors, and there's my data. So it's a nice, cool little pro polish, I think, to namespace your API routes with the actual API. It's pretty handy. Cool. Let me stop my screen share. All right, guys. So it's lunchtime. Any quick thoughts before we go to lunch? So we'll finish up our controllers. We'll push our app up to Heroku. Then if we have time, we'll start working on some Angular views, which would be cool. We covered a lot of the big ground today. Hopefully after lunch, it'll be more time for you guys to kind of build some of this stuff on your own and less of me talking. So have a great lunch, and we'll see you guys at 2:30. Bye.
Hey, Mark, if you're still there, it looks like it's still recording.
Oh, cool. Thank you.